And the date is January 7th, 2019, so I'm going to call our town board special meeting to order. First item on the agenda this evening is roll call. Ms. Iker.
Mayor Christy Melendez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ken Bennett.
Here.
Miles Baker.
Here.
Barry Wilson.
Here.
Paul Redmeyer.
Here.
Tom Jones.
Here.
David Soslowski.
Here.
Okay, our next item is review of agenda by the board and addition of items of new business to the agenda for consideration by the board.
I move to approve.
Second.
Okay, a motion on the floor from Mr. Redmeyer with a second from Bennett and Soslowski approving the agenda as presented. All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved as presented. So moving on then to item B, discussion items. Our first item of discussion this evening is Xcel Energy Future MOU. Who's going to take the lead?
Well, Your Honor, I guess all I figure here goes Lucas McConnell. They approached the town last year about the possibility of entering into an MOU with them, basically identifying things that were of mutual interest to both the town and to Xcel, working collaboratively towards those. I think the idea would be that anything that the town does on its own benefit wouldn't be passed on ratepayers of Xcel, and it's just a way of just yeah, there's just two topics, because it's really, the MOU is not really being presented to the board tonight. Really tonight is the concept, if we should do an MOU, and then if the board likes the idea of us working on an MOU, then we'll actually work on one and bring that back to the board. But I would be happy to forward copies on to anybody. We kind of have a draft right now, but tonight's a lot more concept. So Lucas is here, and then we've got, yeah, jump on up, and then we've got one of his cohorts, Nadia, an attorney who's running a few minutes late. So Lucas is going to.
Nadia El Malik for Xcel Energy is the one who oversees this project. I'm kind of her liaison for the northern Colorado area. My name is Lucas McConnell. I do community and government relations. I oversee the northern Colorado area, which is Larimer, Weld, Morgan, and Logan counties. I've had the pleasure of meeting several of you at various meetings over the past couple. I've been in the job for a little less than 2 years now. So anyway, she'll be up here. Her GPS said she'd be here at quarter after. She has some child care issues that she had to do a handoff with her husband. So, anyway, I am here to talk to you. I only brought 3 copies, and I apologize for that. It's the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding between us and our various cities that we are creating community partnerships with. And the reasons we're getting into these community partnerships is to have a closer relationship with the cities that we see a bright future with. And so to give you an idea, I am one of 8 who do my job, and we're geographically located around the state. And a little over a year ago, we were asked to come up with a town that we thought would best be a candidate for this program. And so all of my colleagues have done that. I can't name all the towns. Nederland is one, Breckenridge is another, and I believe
Lone Tree was on that.
Lone Tree, and I believe Louisville is on there as well. But my colleague will speak to that a little bit better. But we all came to the higher ups in Xcel and said that you know what town and for what reason would they be good to work with. And I've always had a good relationship with Windsor. We've been working through a lot of things in my first 2 years here, and I think that Windsor would be a very good candidate for this. As Shane said, it would be no expense to you as a town, and what we'd be looking to do with this would be to come up with some innovative ideas. And so we've had a couple meetings, throwing some stuff at the wall, seeing what y'all want to do and what we can handle. And I think some of the things that we've spoken about in the past is things like electric vehicle charging. We've talked about weather monitoring and different remote capabilities to detect weather. Let's see, we've talked about a hot topic we have is utility box painting, which we're working through a pilot program right now with Greeley, so I think that's going to become a little bit more capable. But here, the idea here is we don't have any one thing that we want to do with all of our towns. We're asking these towns that we want to have this partnership with, what innovative idea do you have? Do you have a smart grid idea? Do you have automated street light outages we might be able to do? This is a partnership right now in concept, and the next stage will be for us to sit at the table together and really hash this out and figure out what programs are gonna work best for you. But the idea being that the reason I brought you to Hexcel is you're not as large as a Greeley or a Fort Collins, but you're fast growing, you're a medium-sized town here. You're a good mix of rural and urban. You're pretty near 25 as well, so you get a good amount of traffic going through here, and your growth is very well explains the growth that the whole region is seeing up here. And so that's kind of why I put you forward, is I believe that Windsor's a really good candidate for this. And the types of programs that we, like I said, we'd really be liking to study programs with you. We'd like to do some experimental things. We're really looking forward to sort of beta testing a few things, and we're hoping we can come up with some ideas that you, the town, and we, the utility, agree on. That's something out of the box, something that we haven't done in a ton of other towns, and a learning experience between us and Windsor. And so, like I said, we've been in talks with Shane and some of his staff with some ideas, but I think one of the most important things for us to say as Excel is that we're open to your ideas, and that's our next step will be, after we have this agreement, we would like to come to the table and really flesh out what we call a work plan, which would get us from point A to point Z and implementing whatever this partnership might result in it, and getting kind of the boots on the ground. So that's kind of where we see it. Like I said, I can't stress enough that this will be of no cost to the town. This is just a relationship that we're going to have that's going to be closer. We're going to be closer with you than we are of some other towns. And we have some abilities here to really try some new things. And that's kind of the whole leadership. I know that the mayor had the chance to meet Alice Jackson, our new president. She's really pushing that we think outside the box. We don't be the staunchy old utility, and we really push some new technology and some new ideas. And so that's kind of why I brought you in front of Excel. So we think you're a good town for this type of thing.
So some of this beta testing that we might do in the foreseeable future, would it be something that could possibly be rolled out into other markets and other communities?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And saying that, and the reason I was kind of hesitant to say box painting is we're doing that kind of beta testing with Greeley. Greeley really wants to do it. So to give you an example, we're going to give them a handful of boxes here in the next month or two and say, okay, you can paint that. And it really took, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but sometimes engineers can say, why do we want to make this look pretty when it works perfectly? So it took some real convincing, but we think that we're going to have our first box painting going on over there. That's something that could easily migrate over here. And if it's not that specific to box painting or anything like that, utility box painting, we definitely feel like if it's successful here, we want to expand it. So for instance, and we realize that, I guess the way I feel it is that some of the political opinions are based largely geographic around this state. For instance, my colleague who's doing this with Breckenridge, they want 100% renewable energy and they want it yesterday. And I have to come out there and say, well, I'm in northern Colorado, we're Weld County here, right? I mean, 9 out of 10 barrels of oil come from, Weld County. So my people are probably not gonna be 100% renewable right now, but they're probably also not gonna say no to that as well. They're very interested in listening to everything. But different strategies work for, different areas of our state. And so as you can imagine, Metro Denver is vastly different than even it is up here. So we hope that we can really set some trends and come up with some, new ideas that we're able to take back.
So how have we been operating with Excel previously? We've not had an MOU or
Well,
we've had just an
not
IGA
like
or-
this. I mean, we have a franchise. with
Yes, you have your
Excel.
average franchise agreement, which is anywhere from 15 to 20 years, in some cases longer, and that says that we, serve you and we charge you the going rate, and it also dictates the 1% fund, which some of you are familiar with. If you want to get into the details of that, we can do that at a different time. I just want to make sure that we understand that we have the franchise agreement, which is really the bread and butter of it. This is just going to be a separate agreement, an MOU, that will just explain our relationship and how we're going to work better going forward. So we're closer. Sir?
Are we currently getting some renewable energy already based
Yes.
on your basket of
Yes.
goods?
Yes. And so when we have come to Breckenridge being that example, we came to this this exact same work session up there. They said, okay, well, we want renewable energy. We're all about that, and that was their main focus. And that is absolutely within their right to do, and that's what we're going to focus on up there in Breckenridge. I didn't want to speak for any of you to say what your focal point is going to be, but that's something that we can definitely think about. So up there, they're probably going to put a little bit more solar in, I believe, to help boost their renewable load up there, because that's what they want to focus on. So something like community solar could be an idea, but you're not into anything like that. But if it's something that interests you, for sure.
So they're gonna put in the solar as the municipality?
So we have I don't know how it's gonna look going forward, we haven't gotten that far yet, but we are going to help them, we're gonna hand in hand work with them if they would like some more solar exposure. Oftentimes municipalities have access to land where we can put this type of stuff, or perhaps rooftops. And so sometimes when we're trying to put these things in, for example, we can't find a great place to put them. So partnerships like this allow us to kind of share resources, if you will. Yes, sir.
Question, and I guess probably Dennis, and I know we're at 30,000 people, so what is that, maybe 15,000 rooftops?
Well, when we were looking at our mailing, it's like 10,000.
10,000 rooftops?
10,000.
And because I know there's some REA in
Mhm.
Windsor, so what, about how many rooftops do you guys service currently?
Oh, we have more than half of customers around here. REA has a good fraction. The reason I know that is because we're working very closely with the industrial park, Great Western, and some of the lots, individual lots in that industrial park are served by REA, but we serve the entire thing.
I think when we looked at our total mailing for the newsletter, it's like 10,150, and I think when we looked at our Excel counts before, it's like 2/3 Excel,
That's
maybe
good.
1/3 REA.
That's
so
typically our
roughly-
Larimer County, is 2/3, 1/3. I think the only thing that gets a little bit hinky is that, like Lucas mentioned, you would think that REA would be Larimer County, but they're not. They
No.
also service in the industrial park. They're also in Wells County, so it's not clear lines.
Aren't they Water Valley? Wasn't
Yeah.
REA does Water Valley too.
Yeah, and then we have, yes, so it gets down to the individual lot lines. It's more,
My neighborhood's
it's
Excel.
more of a headache than you think it would need to be.
Work.
But,
And Lucas, would there be a way, I mean, to just follow up and give this answer, would there be a way for you to pull that and let us know how many customers, how many rooftops you have?
Yes, I can do
I'd be
that.
happy to send that out to the board.
yes,
And I guess I'd be curious, Shane, on the things that we know are expanding, like Rain Dance and around Harmony, where will those fall? Will those be?
yeah, we can see, we have a service territory map that we can look that up
Yeah.
on. Yes.
And that's already determined, right?
Yes, that is predetermined. There's ways around it, but more or less we like to fall into where those are determined at. There's certain types of territory swaps we can do, but I don't really like to
So
do
this
that.
isn't to
And
the
so
exclusion of REA.
It was unregulated for a long time, and so electric utilities would just go and just kind of land grab customers. And I think that went on until the 80s or 90s or something, and then after that, I think the state said, stop it, and since then, they've had to come service territories. So that's,
We work pretty close with RA. We don't, I came into this job talking about them being a competitor, and we don't really consider it that way. We all have a duty to serve, the electricity and or gas in the area, and when we're not able to do something, we help each other out. So, yeah, that's the service territory maps is something that I can get you, or you can get me a specific address and I can tell you who serves it.
but really, I think to the board's questions, I think it's more along the lines, if we model something and it works really well, is this something that can be mimicked for REA as well? Is that kind of your, more to the point of the question?
Well, sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
And this is my colleague, Nadia.
Okay, hey, thanks for coming, Lucas.
Nadia, I was just going over the kind of holistic view of everything.
Yeah, right.
I gave the example of some of the other towns we're doing this with. Maybe you could tell some details about what my colleagues are doing with those other towns and such.
Sure.
They have 3 copies of the MOU
Okay,
between them.
great.
That's how many I printed out. This is the Breckenridge plan, and this is our franchise agreement.
Got it. So, first of all, sorry, I-25 was a little bit of a disaster.
Really?
So, yeah, never
That's a lot.
happens. I'm a native Coloradan. so-
Expanding I-25 does not fit in the scope of this.
So,
We are working on that.
Yeah.
Great. So good evening, and I think Lucas has already told you, in a nutshell, This is a new framework where we're really looking to proactively work together in any space in the energy area where we have mutual interest and alignment. So we've seen some patterns arise. We have, you are one of 9 Energy Future collaboration communities, and we're seeing a lot of focus on sustainability, economic development, new technology, smart city infrastructure. That means something a little bit different to every community. So we're seeing some of those kind of reoccurring themes. And obviously we touch on all of those spaces. Our towns and cities do as well. And so we think that this is gonna be a great tool to help us do that. And so I don't know if you walk through any of the kind of key components, but I could,
We
I
didn't
could
get
do
into
that.
the minutia of the MOU.
okay, that's the stuff I love,
Yes,
yeah.
she's an attorney, so she can.
Although I'm not wearing my attorney hat on this,
No.
but, yeah, so, I mean, I think at its, essentially, you know, we have our values, our guiding principles. In essence, we share a lot in common, right? We both, are part of a public process, transparency. I mean, we're heavily regulated. And so the Colorado Public Utilities Commission is one of our primary regulators, but we're also regulated at the federal level, and a lot of that includes public processes, transparency, can take a little bit longer to do things, but a lot of the guiding principles that we have in the MOU, I think are important to your constituents and to our stakeholders. You know, things like scalability, not shifting costs to others. I can guess that Windsor doesn't want to pay for something that Denver is thinking about doing, or Nederland, or Alamosa. So some of your sister communities, if they want to do something through our community partnerships, you want to make sure that that's not something that's shifted to you all. But part of the also spirit of this is knowing that we serve over 130 communities in Colorado. We want to really focus on trying to find things that are scalable. So it's exciting because we can try some things new and differently with you or other communities through this vehicle long term. And hopefully those lessons learned will either say, yes, this is something we can scale and offer to other cities and towns, or it's something that, you know, we learn from it and acknowledge that. And so what we kind of like about this is it's not legal, it's not a legally binding agreement, it's not a legal relationship, it's really a policy relationship. So
I use the term beta testing as.
yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd be happy to discuss anything else about it or answer any questions.
You mentioned earlier, I'd be really interested in things that would benefit our people, like charging stations, things that reduce emissions, solar energy. We have to look at numbers and just see the economics, if that really helps citizens here. And then I was thinking, and you mentioned economic development, so maybe think along the lines of the things that we do that would maybe enhance our opportunities of bringing in industries that we might want to bring into Windsor. And I don't know if that fits in this or not, but you mentioned economic development, I was thinking about that.
Other customers of yours, you can threaten to turn off their power.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
That works.
that always works well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Economic development and their growth is gonna be key in there,
Yeah.
you know. That's
Absolutely.
huge
Right.
for them.
It really is.
Absolutely. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. So before we started this, we had kind of one partnership attempt, and actually it's been pretty successful. Panasonic North America was looking to establish a new headquarters in the United States. And the finalists were Denver and Dallas. And ultimately, one of the reasons they decided to come to Colorado and come to Denver was we met with them and we said, we're willing to do something different. And we did out at the airport, the off of Pena Station, the battery testing project. So, you know, there is, that type of process could be replicated in a lot of our communities where maybe you have a particular suitor, either you're recruiting or looking to retain. Maybe there are opportunities, we would have to explore the devil's always in the details, but those are the types of things where it's like, hey, that all makes sense, right? We can find some situations where those would be our big customers or are our big customers. You are a big, our cities and towns are large customers, and you're obviously also one of our regulators at times too. But in this space, we're really looking at how we can partner and collaborate. So I think you're exactly right. That's one of the things we're super excited about.
Well, and we do have an economic development project that we are gonna be working with you on, with the undergroundings
Yeah.
for the DDA, but one of the things that we might wanna look at, cause that to date has been talked about in a very prescribed area just allocated to the DDA, but we are looking kind of beyond those neighborhoods there, and so maybe that's part of what this is do we just stay within the blocks that the DDA owns, or is there opportunity as we're looking at that to maybe extend that a little bit farther and clean up some of those neighborhoods in general back there?
We would be willing to look at and consider all that stuff. I mean, yeah, the next step in the process would be our planning, and
Right.
we could, get to a table and work our work plan out.
Yeah, and the work plan's really gonna drive
Correct.
so your attachment has illustrative ideas that we've come up with just in our discussions, but those are by no means set in stone. And then we really dive in and prioritize, okay, for 2019 and 2020, where do we wanna focus? What are our objectives? What are the measurement metrics? Is there any funding? How are we, financing? How are we gonna do that? And part of that's also that accountability, to be able to say, obviously it's important for you to be able to say, here's what we've been doing, and have a report out and measurements, what's worked, what's not. And that's is for us as well, because this is new for us, to come back and say, look, we're, this is a good move, we're working together, and here are some of the results.
Right, and I don't know how your model works, but I would guess if we're already looking at 2 blocks, it's gonna be more cost efficient while we've got you out there looking at that, to go ahead and extend that, rather than having to call you guys back at a later time and date.
I like what you use the word efficiency.
Yes.
So that's how we try to operate.
Yeah, okay.
Efficiency.
And Nadia, you were on I-25, did you drive up from Denver?
I was in Denver earlier, and then had to come into Boulder, and then came out, so, yes.
That's why I was just curious, will there be a local, do you have where's your Northern Colorado offices?
I'm the Northern Colorado Government and Community Affairs rep. We have service centers on Horsetooth and Fort Collins, and then in the Old Town portion of Greeley, kind of by the university. I'm in Greeley 3 or 4 days a week, and I'm over there 1 or 2 days a week. So
You
I
probably
literally
do.
pass through Windsor 3 or 4 days a week at least.
Make sure you stop at the crosswalks
Yes.
and don't speed. So you would probably end up being our
Yeah.
liaison for the.
Yeah, I think that she's kind of the knowledge, most of the knowledge of this program, but I'm certainly the liaison and do the communications and make sure she gets the questions that y'all have, and we provide them, you guys are the best answers. So I'll be at the table and bring in Nadia as much as possible.
It just seems to me, oh, I'm sorry. We've been talking recently about a one-day policy, so you guys no doubt, to the extent you're trenching anywhere, we'll probably want to cooperate. This isn't creative stuff, this is just something that we're talking about, and I suppose we all have to think about 5G and what that's gonna require in light posts and elsewhere.
Yes.
I'm guessing that's not your infrastructure, well, the post may be your infrastructure.
Yes.
It is, yes, we typily own the light.
And I can get you some information on those attachment agreements. They've actually been revamped in the last 9 odd months, I wanna say.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of a big policy change for us. so.
And I think we've now signed, we can't, because with the carriers, there's NDA, non-disclosure agreements, but I think we've signed with most of the major carriers, because we saw that coming, that communities were saying, we don't wanna clutter or litter our rights of way with, we've already got the street lighting infrastructure and distribution, and so we don't want yet these standalone poles on top of everything else, and so,
Neither do you.
yeah, and then there was, of course, I think it was a couple years ago, there was a state law that kind of mandated a time frame for municipalities to review, or else there's kind of a deemed approval, and so that was one of the things that we really wanted to
In a
try
nutshell,
to
the wireless
get
carriers will
efficiency.
be allowed to attach to our poles at a modest subscription fee. They should be yearly. And I mean, it's, compared to Southern Cal, Edison, it was dramatically less, so.
Yeah, we weren't looking to, we were really doing it because we thought, geez, if we don't get out in front of this, we're gonna have some pretty upset municipalities saying, and just customers saying, hey, what's going on?
I can get you a fact sheet on that. We have a one
yeah,
pager.
it just seems like those are the things that may come up. That's not gonna be strategic, that's stuff that we're just gonna have to do.
Yeah,
And this doesn't touch,
Right.
at all the franchise agreement or any of that. That's kind of our core day-to-day operational and how we interact and how we've interacted for many years. But this is really looking at how do we do some different things, creative things, at your pace, that you want. And that's one of the reasons that we're excited. We have such a diverse pool of towns and cities, because you all are really gonna lead the way for others that, you know, want to do this. And our attitude is we have to be successful in this. You know, we wanna think and act in a more customer-centric basis, which hasn't, you know, candidly always been in our DNA.
Alice is really driving that change to be
Yeah.
customer focused.
Lance, did you have something?
So in terms of thinking outside the box and new technology, do you guys, is there any like broadband partnership potential? Have you guys thought of that or talked about that?
We've been approached a lot about that. Our rights are typically more limited, like our easements and our rights are typically limited to our infrastructure, so electric, gas, and communication associated with that. However, we know that that's a particularly in certain communities that's been a real challenge, and so I wouldn't say you know, anything's off the table, but there's like those kind of some of those details of, you know, people assume, well, you have these lines and all over, can't we just, you know, or you have these corridors, and some of the challenges. So our rights have really been focused more on the electric and gas service, as opposed to those things, but certainly something that we'd be interested in exploring.
Thanks.
Any final questions for our Excel Energy folks?
You know, we've got some big things working on in town, we've got some big ideas we're talking with you about. I wouldn't lose the idea of paying the boxes, okay? That's a little thing, but it's just adds some diversity to the community. I've seen communities that have done that, so, and we've had people volunteering to do it in town. We've had to say no because they're hot boxes or something, you might get fried or whatever.
Right.
You know, so if we move forward more quickly on that than later, that's.
Few
kind of
people with
a neat
Excel
little
can speak to the
opportunity.
details as well as I
Yeah,
can,
that's-
because I've been
Lucas
trying to
is
do
your
it with
man.
community.
Yeah.
So yes, I know that Loveland and Fort Collins do it,
Yeah.
much to some of our chagrin, because they always, you know, why can't you guys do it? So we're
Yeah.
working through that right now, but you're gonna see that.
It's just a
shortly.
little opportunity that beautifies the community.
I'll explain to you, if we can talk sometime, we'll explain to you the minor details.
So it sounds like, and I'm get a feeling, there's a consensus from this board that we wanna move forward with this? And Shane, can you make sure we all are able to get a copy of this? So-
No, yeah, absolutely, yeah, again, it was,
Document.
It's just a miscommunication, he
That's
emailed
fine.
me after I left the office.
So I'm guessing that with that approval, you'll go back and figure out, and then there'll be a time when we'll come back before the board to determine what the details or the strategies or what it is that we will be looking at, working on together. Or talking about some more things and brainstorming.
Yes, ma'am.
And then there may be another meeting after that to determine what we're really gonna do.
You know, when we meet with our cities, they bring in somebody from the Parks Department, somebody from, you know, Public Works, and they'll have their ideas of what they would like to see. So they're gonna all bring a bunch of ideas together, and I'm sure you can, in your wisdom, you can figure out what you think would be best, and we can go from there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, on behalf of my board, I'd like to say I think we feel, are very appreciative that we were one of the communities that you selected to be part of this. And I think you'll find that we can be very innovative and you will get lots of good ideas from us.
That's why I chose you guys.
Lucas's favorite
So
community.
thank you for coming and thank you for
Thank
making
you.
the
We're really
effort to get here tonight.
Thanks for being a partner,
Yes.
and Lucas has a work plan, a sample work plan.
I have a
which we would
sample work
explain,
plan, but
so you can see
I
that.
will go ahead and email it to Shane, and he can send it all out to you. This is our Breckenridge work plan, so we'll build one of these for you when we go forward with this.
Okay, perfect.
All right, have a good night.
Thank you.
so much.
Uh-huh.
Clemson's up, by the way.
Go Clemson, are they
Go
up?
Clemson's up, yeah.
Check this out.
First
Better
quarter.
luck on the-
Oh, you can pull out the Clemson socks.
Clemson
That's
socks.
good.
I'm gonna love
Stay off of my coat.
Yeah, I know, I'm like, I think I'm gonna go back to.
Take a drone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Okay, so moving on to our second item, it's going to be a water financing update. John, are you taking the lead on that, or who's taking the lead?
we've got Carol.
You're taking the lead, okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be team effort for a bit,
Okay.
but Carol is new with Stantec, and,
Okay.
right? Or no, or you just new to us?
New to you.
New team.
So do we need to make introductions of the board to you? Would that be maybe good?
That would be great.
Since there's some good faces here, new faces.
Thank you. You're welcome. If I could start, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the board. My name's Carol Molesky. I'm not new to Stantec. I've been doing this for more than 20 years. Actually, a long, long time ago, I went to CSU, got my master's degree there, and I work on managing projects down at Castle Rock and Parker Water and Sand District, and the Pinery and Plum Creek Water Reclamation Authority. And I'm here to, and you know that Ron Lay, that was here before, has decided to go work for the city of Brighton. And so we're just exchanging places here, and I'm here to support you and to support Ethan and our team.
Okay.
So in your study. But I would like to meet the members of the board.
Okay, so we'll start here and go around the table.
Sure, because she's a Molesky, I'm a Soslowski.
This is
So
only-
you're done, you don't need to. I'm David.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Ken.
Paul.
I'm Shane.
Tom. Miles.
Not very.
And I'm Christy Melendez.
Thank you. Thanks for all that.
Okay.
Tonight, we are, oops. That's good, thanks. Tonight, we wanted to revisit a little bit of an overview of what you've asked Stantec to do in terms of financial planning and a rates analysis. So I'm going to go over just the very basics, just for a few minutes, to talk about our study and what we were focusing on with you. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ethan Hardin here, and he's going to explain more about the scenarios. Because you know that we've been working on this with you for a while. It hasn't been that long since we've been before you. And you might remember, and some of these concepts will be familiar to you, but we've looked at adjusting some assumptions. We've looked at different ways to minimize those rates to your customers for these scenarios, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. These slides might look familiar to you, but whenever we start talking about financial planning and rates for a utility, we talk about a balance. We start with all of the uses of funds. So where does all your money have to go? It has to go to debt service, so you pay off what you borrow. It has to go to your capital costs, so things like your capital improvement program, your infrastructure projects, etc. It has to go to your operating and maintenance expenses, so that you operate your water utility effectively. And then finally, it has to look at policy targets. So things like your reserve requirements, how much do you need to keep in the bank? It has to go to how much do you need to pay for more than just your debt service. It's called debt service coverage. I know most of you are familiar with those concepts. So the rates that you collect from your customers have to be sufficient to cover these uses of funds. The sources of funds most commonly that we have to rely on are what we call user charge revenues. So those are the rates that you collect from your customers through their use of water. We also can borrow money to pay for some of those large long-term capital improvements. And we look at other development-related fees, such as your water resources fees and your plant investment fees. One important concept that we're going to talk about tonight is growth paying for the cost of growth. We want to make sure that no one customer is subsidizing another, so that existing customers pay their fair share and new customers pay their fair share. We accomplish this in the financial planning process by this balance of your fund balance and your rates. So we're going to be talking about that tonight. How do we balance that water fund rates? Through this process, it's taken a while, so I think we've been doing this for a few months. We've looked at this long-term financial plan. So that is a year-over-year estimate of what you need to recover to operate your utility. We have a few goals that we want to keep in mind, and one of them is maintaining that debt service coverage ratio that I talked about. So you not only have to pay your debt service, but you have to make sure that you cover more than that. So that debt service coverage requirement is 120% of your debt service. Then this next bullet is very important, to maintain your adequate cash reserves. We want to make sure that you keep in the bank that 90 days of cash on hand, just in case something happens. You could have a drought, you could have a lot of rain, you could have all of these different circumstances that are different than what we forecast, so it is important to keep some funds available to pay bills. We also want to minimize rate impacts on ratepayers. I know some folks in the room are probably ratepayers, and they probably don't think that's one of our goals, but it really is, we have ratepayers in mind when we're looking at these rates. We try to come up with the lowest possible rate increases, lowest possible rates. I mentioned growth pays for the cost of growth. We know you're faced with, this whole area is faced with a large amount of growth. That brings a lot of pressure on your utility for infrastructure, water, supplies, etc. So we want to make sure that we assess those fees and charge the right amount of fees to those new customers so that existing customers don't get overly burdened. And then finally, this water resource need that is huge and on your table. We want to make sure that we adequately fund that. And that's what we have been looking at for the last couple of months. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
talk about the water
Oh.
resource need.
I'm now turning it over to Mr. Thornhill. Thank you.
We kind of snuck these slides in on them just to give you a brief review of what we discussed in the past. As you know, in the master plan, that demand calc was based on our comprehensive planning at 102,000 residents. Our current potable demand, so where are we at today? You know, in 2017, we ended the year with about a demand of 2,000 acre feet. You add in those shrink losses that we're required to pay to our treatment providers, that's about 2,700 acre feet of supply that we would need for that population. This year, it'll probably be around 2,800, give or take. And then that build out potable demand, so that demand for those 102,000 residents per the comprehensive plan was 12,500 acre feet. You add in shrink losses and such, we're a little over 15,000 acre feet at that build out population. So that's what the master plan said.
Hey, John, sorry.
Yes.
So the 2,800 acre feet, I mean, that's actually, if you looked at our water statements and use and
Yeah.
how we build, that's.
Yeah,
the
so if
actual-
we summed up all of our meter readings,
Okay.
that was the demand, and then plus the shrink that we're required to give to our providers as well.
And, you know, different providers have different shrink, so, you know, really, we get an automatic 30% shrink, you know, so that gets calculated in, so
And that becomes a supply, so I always talk in terms of, if it's at the meter, it's at the tap. And then what we need to actually have to plan is plus, on average, 26%, which is what we add to the number. And that becomes your supply that you need. So that's kind of where we're at today and what our current demand is. And then we took another look at it and said, well, where we're at today and what does the near-term future look like once we start to grow into these populations? So just to walk you through the graph, all those colors look the same to me. I'll
So
try.
I want everybody to think about this in reverse. So the last slide was at 102,000 people, how much water would we need? This graph is based on the water that we're projecting, including NIST. This is how many people we would serve with that. So you guys can kind of see it in reverse.
And at different risk scenarios as well. So you've seen kind of the same graph before, where we have an average yield column, and then we have this planning yield column, and then what we call the firm yield column. This is you know, highest risk on the right, lowest risk on the left. Okay. Average yield. So the first two boxes here. The first one is, of course, our Colorado Big Thompson project shares that we own outright. And then the red box is our North Poudre Irrigation Company shares. Both those boxes, that's all CBT. So that's our current supply today. That's the two sources that we own today. And in an average year, it gets us a little over 4,000 acre feet. All right, current demand, we just talked about it, it's around 2,800 acre feet. That's this first dashed line here. So that's where we're at, serving a population of around 20,000 persons. Now, I'm talking about Windsor's water service area population, not total Windsor population, Windsor's water service population.
And if I can add to that, this whole model is based on that Windsor service area.
Okay. And so any future demands or growth I'm talking about is all about the population within Windsor's water service area.
And discussing with the staff, with current zoning right now, we do believe that most of the growth Windsor's gonna see in the future is gonna be in that Windsor service area population.
Right.
Northwell covers everything north of Harmony Road. So we've got, you know, John Turner's piece, which is kind of industrial, a little bit more rigid Harmony. but we don't have a whole lot of service there. And then also for Fort Collins, Loveland Water District, we're kind of in between County Road 13 and County Road 5. And again, with current zoning, we don't anticipate tons of residential going in there, so not all of our growth will be in the Windsor service area, but staff believes right now, unless future boards rezone a lot of commercial industrial into residential, we think with current zoning, most of our growth will be in that surface area.
I have a question.
Okay.
Why on that first slide did we talk about 102,000 if that's not what will be served by the water?
Well, that's what the comp plan says, so that's been that's just kind of what our last adopted document said, was 102,000 people, and based on that growth, but, so that's why.
That's the long-term vision, so, that's, decades
Well, that
out.
was the long-term
That was the
vision at the
long-term
time we
vision, right.
completed the comp plan
Right.
2 or 3 years ago now.
But what percentage will be in the Fort Collins Loveland versus what we?
Oh, in the water master plan, that 102,000, the comp plan demand and the water demand with it, we're within Windsor's water service area as well.
Okay.
I just wanna make that, I think in the past, I kept saying 30,000 population, I was talking about numbers, I wanted to break those out and make sure we were talking the same population number.
Now, when you have on the graph the additional CBT, 271 units and the additional click, meaning sometime between now and then we're gonna buy those?
I was gonna get to that. This is, water splice we expect to be dedicated here shortly, the Rain Dance subdivision.
Okay.
Per their development agreement, that water should come in to the town, so we added that in as our part of our supply. And then we added, of course, the NISP, the 3,300 acre feet of NISP that we expect to get as well. So you can see in an average year, and the average year is based on those CBT shares getting a 70% quota, which is, the historical average is 72% for that water right. So we use 70% there, and then the average yields for the Glick water, and then our firm yield number for NISP, that's the only number we have. We can well serve a population upwards of 70,000 folks in an average year with all those supplies.
That's assuming how much use, is this assuming everybody's got non-potable?
This is assuming dual use systems throughout the town in that water service area.
Okay, and then how much water are you using, what is it, 1,000?
0.29 acre feet per
Per household?
residential. Yeah, per household.
And so, and I don't leave the slide yet, I just wanna make sure everybody understands that, when I talk to John, I'm like, okay, well, how many people can we serve? He gets in right away, well, we've got our firm yield, right? So in our drought years, if you guys have been following, in the newspaper, know that, our thirsty, neighbors to the west, California, Arizona, or maybe you can put a call on Colorado River, we're gonna need to send more water down. And so we could be looking at just basically a firm yield scenario where all the town has to provide is our actual firm yield. So that graph on the right matters. John and I and Dennis and some other folks have been talking about, how can we mitigate that? Is there a possibility to lease water from other municipalities, or is there a way to get storage so we have more than a firm yield that we can store? So staff is strategizing different ways to make that graph on the right not our reality, and these are gonna be conversations we're gonna have with the board in the future. I told John I kinda wanted to get him on maybe every other month this year, so he's gonna be coming back a lot to discuss with the board. Well, I told him monthly and he begged me no, so I said, okay, every other month. But so that's why we have the three graphs, and they're all important. The one on the right could be our reality. The one on the left is gonna be most years, but water resource managers get paid to make sure the water is there every time.
Right.
We had at the last meeting talked about other possibilities like the waste. And you're just ignoring it for this.
I'm
purpose.
ignoring it for now.
Okay.
Ignoring what?
Waste
shares.
canal.
For example, say you go by firm yield for all your supplies, and that's how you evaluate your supplies, and say we choose 60,000 population as our next goal, you see we're just a little bit short after even acquiring this, so then we would probably be looking at, we need to get a few WIS shares, are there other supplies that we need to get to treat for that to meet that goal? Well, for now, we kind of just, in terms of the rates that are needed to finance NISP, let's just look through NISP and see how far we can grow into that supply.
What's our actual shortfall there?
Up here,
Yeah.
I think we're at about 400 to 500 acre feet to get us to around 7,200 acre feet. that we need.
But again, a couple strategies, one is if we had our own storage, and in wet years, if we could store our extra water, then
That might
this
be
firm
less.
yield in a drought year, we actually have the water and we're not in that curve. Also, if we can lease water from somebody else, you know, some of our neighbors have more water than they're gonna need for the next 50 or 60 years. So maybe we could lease some water from them, and again, we're not on that on the far right. So I think, again, most years, we're gonna be that middle graph or the graph on the left. So, you know, I don't wanna have to, look at spending so much money or requiring so much water that we're not gonna really need. You know, we wanna take care of our future, but I don't think we wanna be, I think there's ways that we can strategize and work around and make sure that we're not on that graph on the right.
What's the idea of, I'm sorry,
Okay?
the idea of leasing water, we've talked about before, how realistic is that? If there's a call in the Colorado River and drought continues, I mean, we've heard that some communities in the south, with their pipeline might have additional water. How realistic is it that we would be able, for the next 10 years, to lease water?
I think it's very realistic. You know, I tell you that both John and I are having conversations with other local governments and their staff about that possibility. I'm hoping to have an update sooner than later for the board on that possibility, but I think it's more probable than non-probable.
And if we're leasing water, other communities might, worst case, be able to hold us hostage if we need water. That's a bad word, I know, but how, I mean, is there any way to anticipate what that cost would be? It probably would not.
Well, we would have a
Market rate
cost
is gonna
in,
go up.
and what I would anticipate is
Yeah.
maybe similar to our water treatment, to where we do like a 15-year agreement, we set the price and we build in how that's
Okay.
going to inflate. We set
Okay.
it up on the number of units we could lease, so maybe say up to, I'm making up to 2,000
So we
acre
make
feet.
agreements
We do
now
it in,
before.
yeah, that's right.
Gotcha.
And so that's actually something that I would like to have, you know,
Yeah.
Lord willing, creek don't rise before the year end, we have an agreement to get in front of the board to basically get into that agreement now, before we need it.
Yeah.
So as we grow, if we have, because that's another thing that really doesn't have to do with the finances, but, when this comes online and starts providing water, may not be in exactly the right time for us for the
Right.
growth, right? So just being able to lease some water and being up for that delta in the short term becomes a better strategy for the town versus us buying all that wet water to get there. Then this comes online and all of a sudden we've got maybe a little bit more water than we think we're gonna need in the long plan horizon.
It's pretty
And
good,
to-
cheap insurance policy.
Two of our agreements, Greeley's and Northwell have clauses in them already that say if you don't have enough water to supply what you're gonna need, we can supply the excess, and there's already a defined price in there. Now, it's market, I mean, it's gonna be based
Market.
primarily on market rate.
Right. Right.
And I can't imagine anyone defining a set price that would put them under market, right? They're gonna have to,
Well, I think the agreements state that they'll treat that water and send it to you, but we do have to cover the raw water behind it.
yeah,
we have to
yeah,
get
you have to buy the
that.
water.
So we still have to go out and get the water.
We still have to lease the water from someplace.
So
The
it'd be
agreement
better
is
to
treat
get,
it.
yeah, it'd be better to get some kind of
We
agreement
gotta have it,
now,
treat.
at
Okay.
assessments plus
Yeah.
a small cost above that.
Yeah.
Although there is lots of conversation happening right now at your leadership level. So Shane, myself, John, Ken, we were all at a special water meeting that Greeley held right before Christmas at our regional leadership breakfast, was that last week?
Last week.
Water was the basic conversation there, and I believe it's gonna continue to be that conversation, and actually, there's probably will be a initiative that will come out of that leadership group will follow. Because the idea is, right now, where we've been having conversations, we've been opposing each other, right? And we almost in some ways have been driving up the price amongst ourselves. And I think the conversation to be had now is, how do we more collaboratively have these conversations and look at ways that not only help our own individual municipalities, but help the entire, region as a whole. And so I think that you're gonna see a lot more regional partnerships and talk happening this year.
Yeah, I saw Roy Otto's article in the Tribune, I thought that was pretty good. To your tents, gentlemen. Guns and ammo. So, you had said that this is based on a two-tap, assuming two-tap and all growth. And are we firm on that? Because it's always concerned me that we'll get pressure somewhere, we'll approve a development, and there won't be non-potable water available. and-
Right, well, so I would say look at the other 6 board members and future board members, because that's a complete town board policy. So, I take from staff side, I think it's the only way to do it. All of our planning horizons really have that built in.
Yeah.
So change that policy would have, I don't want to use words catastrophic, but it would have significant impacts to the town and the amount of water we needed to acquire. So I think from staff side, we would always caution a board against changing that policy for that reason.
No.
Even developers I've talked to, they like that policy, and I don't see them, I mean, they appreciate that, and I don't think I've not heard anybody say, gee, we wish we really didn't have that policy. It's, you know, I think sets us apart from other communities.
And I see communities going more that way, really.
Yes.
So it's like, well, how do we get to a two-pot system? So I think it's more of a trend going the other direction. I think where we're gonna get the pressure though is when, right now, sometimes these non-pot sources, maybe a little bit more plentiful right now, as those start to diminish and developers go and say, geez, I'm having a lot of trouble getting the water rights for my non-pot system, we may start hearing from them, but that's, I guess we'll deal with that when we hit 45,000 people and all of a sudden that's.
Just say no.
Oh, no, yeah, I agree that that's gonna come up someday. And I hope that the board and staff are all the same mindset then, that our dual system policy is the best.
Good. Thank
Any
you.
other questions on this graph? I think that, I'll hand it back to them.
Thank you.
Has anybody heard about, I was gonna add this though, has anybody heard about there being more shares of NISP that may float out there as that gets closer? I mean,
I think a lot of communities are having the same conversation we're having tonight, which is how are we gonna pay for this?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And it's a real cost, so I think it's very possible that some of the original NISP participants are gonna end up walking away because of the cost. I think that's entirely possible. But I think they could also, like, for the town standpoint, if we said, well, where else would the town acquire 3,300 acre feet of water? Yeah, I don't know, I don't know how a town this size goes about that exercise of acquiring, that's a lot of water to make up. So, that's kind of your conversation, if not NISP, then where does the water come from?
I've heard about other towns too who've at least entertained the idea of trying to get in if somebody stepped out.
Yeah, for sure, Wellington.
Yeah,
other
Wellington
cities.
is first,
yeah.
And I think Severance is looking at how they can,
Yeah, I think if anybody jumps out, I think there will be no shortage of takers for people wanting it.
Part of the financing discussions now are those buy-up provisions, so if somebody drops out, how are we gonna assume, the debt payments and stuff on that extra portion, who can buy it,
big price tags.
do the participants get first right of refusal on that water if they wanna buy more? How do you take it outside of that? So, we are having those discussions.
You have a bit of an advantage, I guess, on the finance. How do you finance it? Simply because construction may start someday in the next 5 years, but it'll be delayed. I mean, even if they do the record of decision.
Well, and we got great news today that, it's still planned on 2019
Yeah.
for December, so.
Is that right?
It's been pushed out.
We're hanging on. Well, I was looking at Windy Gap, because they did the permit process, they're, watching that flow. From the date of the record of decision, they're just finally now getting their final permits 5 years later.
Right.
So it sat in courts forever. So I think a 5-year window, I asked the guy who's managing the process, he said, yeah, our typical
Which is
assumption
why I
4
would
years.
continue to stress we need to move somewhat cautiously, while yet maybe optimistically, but still make sure that we have a well-rounded out portfolio and not be totally dependent on NISP or the NISP project at this point. Because I will remind you all of Two Forks, which spent 10 years and a multitude of millions of dollars, and at the end, when they got ready to pull the trigger, it did not happen.
Right.
Everybody lost out on that deal, so.
so we went from Q1 on this record a decision to maybe by the end
Straight
of the
to
month?
Q4.
By the end of the year?
Yeah.
End of the year.
Yeah.
Beeline.
Okay.
Yep,
Great.
yeah, and this is my surprise face.
If your head was on the card, you'd be more surprised than I am.
Love that one.
Sorry.
No, it's still
Now,
there.
back to the money.
This has been one of the issues, go ahead.
Just a quick question. You said that, prior slide, you were talking about maintaining debt service coverage ratio.
Oh, yeah,
120%.
Mhm.
And I'm guessing really that's gonna relate to whatever kind of debt bond we're offering at the time.
Mhm.
The coverage ratio may vary depending on our own credit standing or the revenues we're dedicating.
It could,
But I'm guessing it's market standard 120?
It depends. It actually
Right.
depends on your agreements. So I've seen 125, 110.
You've seen
Even
it
further.
built too.
Yes.
Okay.
And so,
All right.
one of the, obviously, this whole project has been a key component that we've discussed while we've been doing multiple scenarios and trying to pull all these costs in to try to determine what these rates need to be for our ratepayers to make sure we are correctly funding this project. And to your point, we have looked, or we have brought forward the options of looking at different types of debt service, whether that's different interest rates, going on our own and being able to go to the market and pull those, pull a debt proceed by ourselves instead of through Northern Water, because one of the pieces that we were looking at with Northern Water is that a lot of that coverage might fall through as a group, and all the other 14 entities that are within NISP, if that debt service coverage needs to be higher, that means our revenues need to be higher in order to cover that.
Right.
So that is something that we can look at in the future. Today, we haven't done that yet, and we'll get to that when we get to the scenarios of why we haven't. So, and piggybacking off of John, looking at the growth estimates within the city, we looked at the economic development report, and we're able to look at all the different platted and not platted lots that are coming in within the city, have determined 565 units in 2019, and then are projecting 332 units, and that's single-family equivalents through the end of the projection period, which is 2028.
So that's single family and multifamily.
Mhm. And so we bring them all to one common denominator, so we're able to look at them as a per unit ratio, so we can better project stuff into the future. And then lastly here, one of the key constraints that we were looking at as a team was not making that raw water development fee any higher than the current cost of any sort of CBT unit. So today, I think we're at, what is it, 51.5 or something like that? So we want to make sure that dollar per acre foot is competitive with what you'd see on the open market.
And so this would ultimately be obviously a policy decision by the board. I think it would be recommended by staff that we would benchmark it to CBT, because otherwise we're gonna probably really curtail growth. If we're more expensive, then they could go on the market. I think the board would get a lot of pressure from the development community saying, geez, I can buy it here for this much, how come you're selling it over here for this much? So, and I think right now CBT is a little bit higher than what we're projecting for the cost of NISP, so it's a good number for us to use. It can be a competitive number, and we can build up some cash with that. But so we're just saying we think it should be limited by CBT, but obviously that's a policy decision by the board.
And that's one thing that we've left constant in all of these scenarios that we're about to show you as a limiting factor to what we can solve with.
So is that 332 units per year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I just wanna say that's a conservatively low number.
Yes.
You know, right now, we're hitting the 5-something, but I would rather
And averaged it out over those 9 years, right?
That's
Probably.
right. Yeah, I think we're better off if we give you numbers, say this is what we think we're gonna generate. If we have more development, more money's coming in, and in a couple years we say, geez, we don't really need to do this kind of increase to our ratepayers because, you know, we're generating more money. I think that's a better scenario than coming back and saying, well, board, we thought we needed to go up 9.5%, but it turns out it needs to be 14% because we don't have near the development we thought.
Well, and if I do the quick math on between now and the end of 2028, it means we need to have about another 1,000 acre feet of water in the next 10 years.
And obviously NISP is a major player in bringing that acre feet to the table. And so we have couple different scenarios with other raw water options that you had mentioned about diversifying that portfolio of water, so we'll get into that when we touch on those scenarios as well.
Sorry,
Yes.
get back on that, on the raw water fee, limited by CBT unit. But of course, the unit only yields, what, 200 and
Of
some?
CBT,
Yeah,
each unit of CBT on average
Right,
here
on average.
yields 0.7 acre feet.
right. So are we thinking of rock router fee adjusted to be an acre foot cost?
Yeah, so we usually will, right now, how we determine the per acre foot cost of CBT is you divide that
0.7.
by 0.7. So, you know, if units are, I'm seeing sales for 36,800 per unit right now, that's a acre foot cost of 52,500 or so per acre foot.
And the raw water fee essentially
It's
is
like
what we've got now here.
For 40 per unit,
Is,
yeah.
is what we've got now in the raw water fee, that's the developer fee, for bringing on new.
Yeah, it'll be going up, we'll be doing the next quarter analysis. Right now, it's 47,500 per acre foot based on the data that we have, but we'll get the next quarter data, in fact, anytime now, and it'll be going up.
I guess I just question the assumption that you've pegged the raw water fee to CBT, because the price of those units at this point has no reflection of bond costs or capital costs. It's simply market demand that's driving these units one way or the other. If nothing changes, or if CBT just levels, the raw water development fee stays flat, we're really saying then that the developers really ride whatever and track with CBT, but the ratepayers, on the other hand, are gonna have a 10 to 15 or whatever % increase, like it or not. So, and we had always struggled with how do you share that burden? I'm not sure pegging it to CBT is a fair consideration of.
I think we're just saying that it can't go any higher than CBT.
Well, but on the,
Right.
I would say this the other way, right now, we believe that actually CBT per unit is more expensive than what we're forecasting for NISP. So it's a better price for us to use, is actually a little bit higher, and then when we get that cash coming up front, then we're not paying any debt service or anything else on it. I think this is a model that we're gonna look at every year or every other year to make sure we're current with it. I think at any point we're looking, we're saying, guess what, CBT's plateaued. NIPS now, we know based on whatever costs are gonna be higher. I think at that point it's gonna be a policy decision for the board. Do we charge more? Do we say, you know, this is our pricing because we know NISP is higher? You know, the risk is that we cull development to a point to where we're not even hitting these numbers, and then we're gonna still hit that 2026, 2028, whenever we really need cash on the barrelhead. If we slow down development too much, that's just more of a burden for the ratepayers. So that's why it's really a hard calculus, and I think a hard policy decision for the board is where do we peg that price? Because if we make ourselves too expensive to develop and they go elsewhere, we still have NISP coming online, and we still have obviously a big train coming at us that year. So that's why we're suggesting CBT unit, and right now I think it's sound. But again, if NISP, if that's on the inverse, and all of a sudden NISP is more expensive, we think, than the CBT unit, I think that's gonna be a policy decision for the board at that point. Do we increase, and what are our risks?
I'm guessing from this statement, though, to the extent you're gonna show model forecast on rates, impact, et cetera, for the water fee, you're gonna reflect this assumption.
Yes, and so we've reflected that assumption, we increased it at 3% per year, just knowing what we know now. And to Shane's point, one of the things that we've struggled with as a team, coming back and forth and kind of spinning our heads of how do we project these costs going forward, and no one really knows. And so one of the things that we would recommend, obviously to any of our clients, but especially to you guys, is to take a look at this every year, not every couple of years, because with so many variables coming into play, as Shane said, if we hit those numbers with, I think we're at 600 plat lots this year, if we keep hitting those numbers, the rates that you're gonna have to charge your ratepayers are gonna be much less. So there's just so many moving parts in these areas that we would recommend looking at it extensively over the time period.
Feels like a tough position. It's kind of like, if you don't want your water rates to go up, then the town's gotta be 150,000 people. Wait, no, I want a small town feel. Well, okay,
It's gotta be
then,
part of it.
right? I
Right,
mean,
that's
there's a
part of it.
tension between.
Sure.
But even if we don't grow, David, we're gonna have costs that are gonna go up. And if we've got to do some infrastructure things in order to secure the quality of water that's still coming and the quantity, because if they have a call on that river right now, we would probably be in trouble.
Mhm.
Well, if they're gonna put a call on, actually, we hope they do it right now.
I think, in 2019, 2020, I think the town of Windsor is fine with the call with that 50%. I think as we go out, unless we have more water coming to our portfolio, we really could be in trouble. I mean, if they put that call on in
Yes.
2023, I don't know where we are.
But that's why even if we were not to grow, we still have to look at we still need to do some things to secure our water future, even if we were to just kind of stay as we are today.
That's a good point. And that leads in perfectly to our next slide here. And we're gonna take a step back from our assumptions and really kind of get more into the model and the type of numbers that we use in order to come up with these scenarios. So right now, we're looking at our operating and maintenance assumptions that we've used for our scenario, what I'll call 2, which is, we'll show you here in a little bit, but you can see here on the graph on the right how these costs have broken out as a proportion to an average bill. So all of the costs in the model are gonna escalate at 3%. The ones that are gonna be different are gonna be any type of fuel and chemicals, which are about 5%, and then we've tagged any type of personnel within the city at a higher rate, so that's, I believe, 2.5%, and then tied to the growth. So we, as we talked with the team here, we came to the assumption that we're gonna need more people on board to help keep that level of service as we grow as a town. So those are gonna be rising higher than 3%.
Okay, and 2 things I want to point out with this graph. One is you'll notice in fiscal year 2019, personnel has grown. That's because we went through the exercise this last year to look to see who's actually working for water that was being paid out of the general fund. And we also had a full year of John this year, which I can tell you he's a lot more of that graph than he wants to be. And then the second thing is, because I know we didn't label it and it might have confused a couple of you, the next chart we see shows it with NISP, so we wanted to show you just kind of, this is our current O&M, and then the next graph is kind of the inverse with the exact same bar graph, but it's just focused on NISP.
Exactly, so these are gonna be operating costs, and as I mentioned before, it's a proportion of our total bill, and you can see that on the y-axis. All the black outline is gonna be capital costs, so I'll move, yes, please.
So it looks like, and it may just be visually, it looks like the black personnel services, at least toward the final few years, isn't increasing.
Mm-hmm. And that's, it's, as you mentioned, it's just because it's a proportion
It's
of the
a
total bill.
very small number.
And so when we bring in the capital costs, which is the black outline there, it doesn't look as it is rising, but it in fact is within the model.
And the water treatment costs do
Mhm.
seem to drop in 2028.
So that's gonna be this darker gray. I
Right.
think they're pretty similar. They increase at about 3% per year. And we were looking, we looked back, I think, 40 years at what Northwell County, Greeley, and Fort Collins, Loveland has charged, and we averaged those out to determine what that average cost increase would be.
It does go down, doesn't
Honestly, sir, I can't tell. But this whole thing is the average bill, just so you guys know, we use it on 5,000 gallons of use per month with that flat fee of $14.81.
Yes.
So the water treatment costs are like what we've just approved, the 3.29% on consumption.
Right.
Everything else is tied to that flat rate of $14.81 that you see on your bill.
it? Right, and that's staying, that's.
No, it will increase.
Okay.
It will increase, and you'll see here. when
And
we
these
get to
aren't
the-
linear, they're proportionate, which is why they look like they're not increasing.
Okay.
Yeah. So then next we get into our capital expense, which is just, as Shane mentioned, the inverted piece. What makes up these capital expenses are gonna be both average renewal and replacement, and then so that renewal and replacement is about $1 million per year. In 2028, we increase that to about 5% of your assets, which is about a little over $2 million. So we get back to a higher renewal and replacement to make sure that system is operating to its fullest extent. The raw water costs, which we're talking about today, has increased about 15% since we spoke and came and presented last year. So that total cost for Windsor is about $96 million that we need to cover. And then lastly, in 2026, 27, and 28 is a $25 million water treatment plant. And we wanted to point out that that's being fully paid by new development. We have a specific fund set aside in the Water Enterprise Fund that holds all of that water plant investment fee that's being built up and being paid for the water treatment plant, so that cost is not being borne by your ratepayers.
So Jess, could you get in and just do a quick reminder, refresher for the board as far as what they pay for, what a developer pays for fees, or what's paid, and where that money goes?
So, when we're talking about paid for development, your raw water resource fee is a separate fee on top of the plant investment fee. So you'll see this on your building permits, each individual household bill. So just so you guys are clear, the water treatment plant, when we collect the PIF, or the plant investment fee, that's how that is paid for, and it's not reflected on this bill or on any of the fees when we talk about water resources. Water resource fee is the fee based upon the CBT amount for a single family home. And that has to do with also the 50-50 cash and lieu policy you guys have as well. We also see other things like your water and sewer treatment, or sewer plant, and your, the storm drainage fees.
Yeah, and we also have a small NISP, fee that,
Yes,
remember you wanted this?
$475.
$475.
That we've currently started to collect.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
You could go back to
No
the
problem.
prior. So along the left, you have 3 bullet points.
Yes.
Raw water cost, normal renewal and replacement, which is the only thing that sounds like either O&M or capital. And then the water treatment plant, which is capital. When I look at the graph, and I have 2 colors, I have white O&M and black capital.
Yes.
Is the raw water cost, if it's in that graph somewhere, where, and or why would it be? Raw water cost is neither, or is that considered capital?
So we are considering it capital because of all of the pieces that come together. So we haven't broken that out as we did in O&M to specific pieces. We will in a couple slides later. But right now we're lumping all capital costs into one.
It's the liquid asset.
So the white O&M really is only the second bullet point. Am I right?
Well,
We're not highlighting any of the white, the non-filled in portion here.
yeah,
We're just trying to show you the proportion of capital costs to an average bill as we move through our projection period.
so that, the previous slide, the one right before this, had, that's our normal O&M, water treatment, that's, yeah, that slide there.
Mm.
So that's the O&M piece of the average bill. So this is just to illustrate, so people understand, when you pay your water bill, this is how much is going to these kinds of uses, these kinds of costs, and we wanted to show you from the capital side, but, so that's why that was there, for those illustrative purposes.
Does that make sense? Anything else? Okay. So next, these are gonna be the same graphs that we just saw. It's the revenue requirements related to an average bill. So the gray line is gonna be our revenue requirement if we were maintaining the status quo and we did not have NISP as a project coming online. So we can see that that's less than the black bar, which is with NISP. So our capital costs are increasing, and that means our revenue requirement is increasing. So I'll point out to the orange line is our current revenues today.
Well, and actually, I'd say that was our current revenues in fiscal year 18, since the board
Yes.
just adopted an increase at the end of 2018. Our new, that orange bar should now be kind of level with the gray bar in fiscal year 19.
About 4%.
And then go straight from there,
Yep.
for now,
That's right.
because we don't know.
Yep. So if we don't do anything, what we're showing is that our costs are increasing, and we need to be able to recover the change in the top of those bars in the orange line. So if we weren't doing that, we would basically be taking away from our fund balance each year as we move through our projection period if something were not to be done. And again, showing the difference in the amount that NISP is actually putting a burden on the city of pulling in extra cash to meet those requirements. And so this is what I was mentioning earlier. This is a year-by-year breakdown of our capital improvement projects, and we broke them out based off of what we called Windsor CIP, which is gonna be more of the renewal replacement. And then the water resource related, and that's gonna be NISP related projects and any other raw water shares that we're purchasing. And then orange is the water treatment plant. That's gonna be coming online in 2028 if growth is projected at 100% of what we're looking at. So in FY 18 and 2028, you'll see that those are a little bit higher. We were working on a transmission line with North Will County in FY 18, and in 28, we again bring that renewal replacement back up to a little over $2 million, which is why you see the jump and win the quote-unquote Windsor CIP there.
And the gray is primarily NISP.
Primarily NISP, yep, there's gonna be a couple whisk shares in there, but we'll get to that here in a second.
Well, possible, the board hasn't decided that, we've
Sure.
talked about that.
Sure.
And just to double note, the reason why we put the water treatment plant in there is just for timing. Remember, again, that is paid by the plant investment fees by new connections. It's not part of a bill or anything. Just wanted to show you the timing of the projects.
Mhm. I will also note that you can see that in years years 2021 through 2026 is really the burden of all of those NISP costs, and we begin to, our capital outlay begins to lower after that, and we can discuss that at another point, but our actual cash needed in each year will subsequently decline as well.
But this is also assuming the assumption that we would move forward with this water treatment plant.
Right, and so
And that may change too, because now we're having some, maybe additional conversations, right?
that's right, and so these are, you know, there's so many things that are related here for the board, and I think we could have started this meeting at 7 in the morning and still been
Yeah.
talking and not close. So you're right, and again, because because the water plant is paid by developers when they come in and buy the tap fees, it's shown there to just show the timing. But you're right, Your Honor, if we were able to work out an agreement with another water provider and have them treat our water.
Well, plus it's only showing 25 million, which I'm guessing that's what you're estimating our share, because that plant in those numbers is 80 million in today's costs.
That's right.
So, I mean,
And it's
Yeah.
another great point that all the levers that get pulled in this, you know, we're pulling certain levers that we know right now, but it can change.
right,
And so that's a good thing to keep in mind.
okay.
So what do you anticipate tap fees in, say, 2026 are gonna be? Or over the, how fast are the tap fees gonna escalate along with, as the years go by, or aren't they,
So we've escalated them at 3%.
the tap fees?
And are you specifically talking about the water plant investment fee or the
Yes,
raw?
yes,
the
correct.
water, okay, so yeah, that, I believe off the top of my head is escalated at 3% starting from today to the end of the projection period. Okay, so those are all the key inputs that we've, as a team, have come up with, have decided that these are the best inputs that we have today in order to bring some scenarios to the board, in order to get a better direction of how to proceed for the town. So the first slide that I'll show you here is a scenario summary. This is a matrix of all the key points that we believe you would like to see when trying to evaluate these scenarios. So we have 3 different scenarios. One's going to be no NISP, and that's more of a status quo, what would happen if we didn't have to do anything today. Scenarios 2 and 3, and I'll show you this here in a minute, are where we feel that we need to be heading in order to adequately fund our water resource projects in order to be cognizant of the future and the raw water that we need. So scenario 1 is no NISP. The cumulative rate increase through 2028 is 55%. The raw water is purchased on an as-needed basis, as we do today. There's going to be no debt related to any sort of raw water projects because we have the cash to fund everything we need right now. And then the other 2 are basically not applicable because they don't apply to the NISP projects that we have. So scenario 2 is going to be what we call full participation, 119% cumulative rate increase. We fully participate in NISP at that $95.9 million. We issue $66 million of debt in order to help fund these projects. We have 12% of the ratepayers' share going towards that $95.9 million. And I'll touch on that here in a second when I talk about scenario 3. And then one of the things that we as a team looked at in trying to fulfill that raw water portfolio is looking at 2 whisk shares to purchase as well in order to bolster that raw water that we do have. And then scenario 3 is going to be a little bit more moving money around and being able to lower some rate increases and things like that. So I'll touch on that here in a minute, but it's 104% cumulative rate increase. Again, the same full participation. We issue $10 million less in debt. And one thing I will point out with that is we end up having in 2028 about a quarter or 3/4 million less debt service payment per year. So that goes from about 4.7 to $4 million per year. And so that's a big difference. And as we talked about before, meeting that debt service coverage, that allows us to have less rate increases as well. And today, last year we brought in about $3.5 million worth of revenue, and so 750,000 on that 3.5 million, it's nothing to scoff at, that's a lot of money. And I know it's hard to try to conceptualize what debt looks like in the future, but trying to bring it back into today's dollars.
And so, before you move on, I just wanna give the board a couple concepts. So one is, we definitely heard from the board loud and clear, you know, we wanna minimize any rate increases to our residents. And so I think we met with Stantec folks 8 times, and, you know, since the board met last, so we've been going to work on different scenarios. But the 2 elements that are working against us, one is just the timing with NIST. If we had 30 years to get ready from today for NIST, I think we could say, look, I think with the money we're gonna charge for raw water fee, we're gonna have enough money there and we'll just pay cash. Other thing that's working against us is that we need to have a certain amount of money on hand when we go into NIST to cover our debt service ratio. We have to have that cash on hand. And so it's just how we get that much cash. And so when we look at our growth projection and our raw water fees that we can collect conservatively, there's no way to not pass this on somewhat to the homeowners. And I think as we go out for any kind of debt issuances, if somebody's gonna loan us money, they're gonna say, you're gonna back this by your ratepayers. Even if ultimately they're not the ones who end up paying most of it, we need to show them that we're willing to do that in order to get that debt. So those are the constraints we've worked against. And so scenario 3, he's gonna talk a little bit more about it, but the concept is, well, geez, what if we loaned our water fund some money from the general fund? Is there a way, because we know it's gonna come in eventually, you know, as development keeps on coming, so is there a way to soften that blow to the ratepayers, loan ourselves the money? So that's why we're playing around with this, of any way that we can work strategically to lower the burden of the ratepayers. Understanding that there's really conceivably almost no way to not have some of that burden for them. So I just wanted to put that out there.
The only thing with the general fund, you know, just obviously it's a loan, but just not putting the burden on Windsor residents outside of the water district. You know what I mean, who are paying into that general fund.
Right.
And then that would be one thing, because, you know, that is my district of Miles, obviously. And, I have looked at Loveland, Fort Collins, they have their projected increases out on their website as well. So you don't want any resident to be burdened twice with rate increases, right?
Right.
But that would be one thing. The other thing is if we do that loan, is it gonna limit other things that we can do in town, cause that $6 million is not there,
Sure.
that's a lot of money.
Right, well, and so if the board did make that policy decision to do the loan, it would be a loan with interest. So we would set it, we would take a look at the local bank interest, we would figure out, and it would be benchmarked by resolution. And so it'd be something that you say, well, I paid my taxes, well, you know, you paid $1, and with interest, it's gonna be, you know, $1.07 by the time it's paid back or whatever. So there would be that, but I think there is always that equitability, right? Like, what's the fairest way to do this? So again, we just ran that scenario, because I'm thinking, how can we get the cash that we need when we go into this debt and minimize the burden onto the ratepayers? How can we do that? And there's, you know, as a municipality, we don't have a lot of options as far as how we generate cash other than taxes and fees. So that's.
So, yes.
Yeah, well, Barry made one point I want to make, is if we loan $6 million, what that means is there's other projects that would be delayed in our town. So we have to make that decision. But would you explain to me again the difference of the 66 million
Yes.
and the 56 million? They
Yep.
kind of went over my head.
Sure.
My head.
Sure.
Okay.
So, throughout our projection period, we have
Yeah.
9 years that we have capital for NIST that we need to pay for.
Okay.
And we wouldn't be asking for proceeds in year 1 for all of 9 years. So throughout the period, if we're able to, for example, have $6 million from the general fund to bring in cash today, so we don't have to loan more money, the difference between loaning
So we wouldn't have to,
66.
got you, okay.
So it's
6 million,
basically
turns
what
into
I'm,
10 million.
yeah,
Gotcha.
it's 10 million,
Okay.
but
Well,
the debt
and
service
plus
payments are less.
There's also 2 list shares in there, right? That's also
Yes.
part of it.
Gotcha.
No,
this one,
there's,
yes.
yeah. that's
Okay.
individual.
Okay.
And so, just to preface scenario 3, for scenario 2
Makes sense.
is about as high as we ran a lot of scenarios, was about as high as we saw all these scenarios come out at. Scenario 3 was a lot of, as Jess said, lever pulling, trying to get things to work, and more on the lower end. And I'll show you, this will make more sense on the next slide. And so to your point, sir, the $6 million loan from the general fund, as we do raise those rates, and you saw at the capital projects start to drop off in 2028, those rates, unless we do something at that point, are still high enough that there's a lot of money that's coming into the fund, and we don't have these $9 and $10 million years of capital projects from NISP. So there's more wiggle room out in 2028, which we don't project out past that, to be able to then pay back at a quicker rate than what we would see otherwise. So what we've noticed in all of these scenarios is once we get through this basically capital call of NISP in those 9 years, there's a lot more flexibility because these rates have been raised, and there's more cash flowing through and things like that. So, yes.
Okay, you're borrowing 66 million against 95, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and the difference will be made up because we're building a kitty through the years to not only service the debt, but also to have some cash on hand to put toward the project?
So we do have some fund balance already built up in order to help cover these projects. Some of it, as you mentioned, is gonna be some from the rate increases. One thing that we did model is that every year debt service payment that we do issue on the 66 or 56 or whatever it might be is gonna be paid for by development. So all of those development fees that are coming in, we're bookmarking those and putting them to debt service payments. So we don't want our ratepayers to be paying debt service payments on these new raw water development projects that have been coming in. So we made sure that that number isn't a part of this 12% or 11%, because that's not fair to ratepayers to be burdened with a debt service payment of these raw water projects.
Yeah, and so to answer a different way, so yes, the difference between that 95 and 66 is basically what we think we could generate based on our growth rate with the raw water fees, plus what we think we need to increase the water bills to get us to that amount. So that's how we generate that money.
Okay.
At 30 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well said. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So this is a breakout of the scenarios 1 through 3 and how we've looked at the actual rate increase numbers and then what the average bill looks like per year. So scenario 1 is gonna be a 4.5% rate track from 2019 through 2028. And then we see the average bill, and on the right is gonna be like a cumulative or impact column. So 55.3 is gonna be that cumulative rate increase, and then the $19.46 is the difference between FY '28 and FY '18 for the average bill. So scenario 2, it looks at about a 9.5% rate increase, and then in 2027 and 28 we can lower that back down, because all of those large capital projects have been paid for, and back down to something closer to a CPI index of about 3%. And then scenario 3 is 8.5%, and then the 3.5% again. One of the limiting factors that we had on every one of these scenarios is that, as you saw, we keep issuing so much debt, a large amount of debt, and then in about 2026, I believe, that's when all of that debt has been issued, and as the concept that we've mentioned before, that debt service coverage really starts to be a burden on our water enterprise fund. So we have to make sure that we're holding 120% of our expenses and funded by rates to make sure that we're covering that debt. So that's where all of these, as you can see, when we move to the 3%, we have to keep those rate increases up there because we are issuing that debt and have to keep that covered. So another way to look at that is gonna be this graph where we show the baseline in black, scenario 2, which I mentioned was about the highest one that we've seen, and then the gray bar, which is scenario 3, and that's about the lowest one that we've seen when we try to pull all these levers and do all these different things. As Jess and Shane had mentioned, we ran about 50 or 60 different scenarios for you all, and we ended up always within that gray shaded bar. And again, at the bottom, you can see the average bill and how that plays out. The little hitch at the end is going to be that 3%, so instead of a much larger increase, we start to settle off of that and move back down to 3%. So the next slide that we're going to look at is how do we frame this in terms of Windsor, and obviously 9.5% and 8.5% increases are large. We're not coming in here and saying, do it right away, that's no problem. We understand that's a large burden on every single one of you to help pay for that. So we wanted to bring in something that we saw, talk about affordability in terms of the EPA, and I'm going to ask Carol to speak about this. She has a lot of expertise in dealing with affordability in the EPA.
Historically, EPA and American Water Works Association has looked at whether or not a bill, water bill or sewer bill or both, is affordable based on median household income, so MHI. And I wanna this is an interesting slide, because we're looking at the water bill compared to the median household income in Windsor from 2017, which is just over $90,000. This is not a perfect metric. I want to caution you on speaking too much about it, because there are always areas of your community that will not be able to afford water and sewer bills, and they will be able to afford these at different levels. So again, we're not just gallantly saying, oh, it's affordable, but this is a measure that's actually being looked at today across the nation, and we're refining how we produce this and how we look at your monthly water and sewer bills compared to either your lowest income earners or the median. So this is just something I thought was interesting to share.
Right, and Jess has a second, kind of piece of paper to pass out, and this is, fairly recent data, that shows, where our average water bill stacks up compared to basically other front range communities. So that just, again, I think the board is gonna be the group that says, this is what our standard is, this is what's affordable. But the only metric that we really had that was out there that we could find is this EPA standard. So it's not aspirational for us, again, it has its limits, but we did think it at least sparked some conversation with the board.
What again was the organization that came up with the 2.5%?
2.5% is from American Water Works Association, and the Environmental Protection Agency also has a 2% of median household income threshold. That's currently under review.
And just so you know, on this, what we've handed out, it's based on a 10,300 gallon use. A little bit different than our 5,000 in the model.
It's based on 10,000?
10,000.
Per month?
Yes, this is a monthly bill.
Wow.
So the first one is Colorado
It
Springs.
just kind, you kinda have to have a range
Yes,
for all the
ma'am.
towns.
Yeah, the first one is Colorado Springs, I pardon that, cut that off there. And kinda sees where we lay.
So we've thrown a lot at you, and there's a lot of different intricacies in each one of the scenarios. That's all we had for today. Obviously, want to open up for questions and discussion about your guys' thoughts and how we may be able to improve or build upon what the scenarios that we've come up with.
That's one thing I'd like to ask to see if you can prepare. So in this, for instance, you talk about cumulative rate increase. By using the word rate, I don't know if you're talking about residential only, or residential commercial, tier 1, tier 2, tier
Yes,
3,
yes.
or if you're including the flat fee, or if you're including the tap fees, or, so,
I understand.
is it all? Or is it just residential?
So it's gonna be all rates. So what we do in the finance plan is we look at our rate revenues, we break them out by class, but how we increase them is gonna be by our total rate revenues. So what we saw is we brought in $3.5 million of revenue, rate revenue last year. And so what do we need to increase that $3.5 million revenue by in order to make this work? So that would be the 9.5, 8.5.
So I
So
guess
again,
what
there's no tap fees, because again, the
Yeah.
plan investment fees or tap fees can
Yes.
only be used for capital, for like a plan, so that's kind of off the table for this conversation, because we can't use it to acquire raw water, we can't, it's really limited to what we can use it for, it's a plant investment fee, and so it's not built into this model, but it is assumed that we use all of that money to build the water plant.
And
and to pay the debt.
Yes.
And to pay the debt on this.
Yep.
To pay the debt on, no, well, not the tap
Not
fees,
tap fees.
the raw water fees.
Yeah.
So we have a raw water fee, and that would acquire the raw water and pay that. We have a tap fee that we collect that goes to like our water plant,
Western Slopes and
you know?
that's the plant investment fees.
Yeah, the plant
So
investment
those
fees.
are two fees that are paid on.
So I think, and this is my point, is in the course of this presentation, these words are thrown to plant fee, witness fee. Can I see a graph that has every fee, every revenue source that we have in the water enterprise fund? and what those revenue sources will do through 2028. So is the $14.81 of a residential flat fee gonna just increase by 3%? Okay, what does that look like? Is the tap fee gonna increase by anything? What does the tier 1 rate do? What does the tier 2 rate do?
So, looking at that is a whole nother, a whole nother project. So, when you look at how all of these, when we would be looking at each tier and determining what that rate increase looks like, what we call a rate design. So each one of you all is gonna have a different usage within your home. You're all gonna hit a different tier. So we bring all of those bills in to one model and then be able to lump them into similar looking bills and then be able to run those consumption numbers through all these tiers and make sure that we are collecting the actual amount of revenue. That's a lot of work. It's a different scope than what we've done in our finance plan.
So let me ask this though, you're saying as far as if our base rate is $14.80 a month, what are we presumed every year that base rate would be? And then for our, like a higher user, commercial industrial user, what's the base rate for like a 1-inch tap, 1.5, that base rate, and that presumed going through? Is that it? Cause that's pretty.
Because that'd be the 9.5, 8.5, whatever.
If I think about our sources of revenue,
Mhm.
each of our sources of revenue, what we know from this is that some ratepayer, and I'm not even sure which ratepayer, because you're lumping all tiers into the ratepayer, is gonna go up by 10 or 9.5% per year.
Well, that's every ratepayer, every water customer.
Okay, what
Each
are
of the fees?
what are the flat fees gonna do? What
So,
are the
6%.
tap fees gonna do? I guess I'd like to see every revenue source, whether or not it's gonna be used
Okay.
to accumulate money. I just wanna see graphically what each rate does over to 2028. Because it'll be obvious then who's bearing the burden.
I know what you mean, because Tom asked a question about tap fees, and what I heard was 3% a year on the tap fee. So I was a little confused too, and I
That's
heard they're 9.5, the tap fee is 3, so.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah,
we're-
that's why I wanna
right,
see a graph on
right.
each line.
So I think what we're trying to explain.
Just so we know who we're impacting.
Mhm.
Okay.
So just to be real
Yeah.
clear, the water resource fee, so that's the raw water,
Right,
is calculated by CBT.
right, and that's gonna be
At
adjusted.
this point, until we
Right, gotta be adjusted all the
revalidate,
time,
and that changes.
based on market,
Mhm.
right,
And that is on every building permit,
right.
at whatever, if it's a single family and we're doing 50/50, I think it's 6,780-ish right now. And then you have the plant investment fee, so that's for the treatment, the tap for water. That's 5,781 right now per single family
That's
unit.
what I was told, yeah.
Okay. So that would change and be escalated at 3% according to this model, the plant investment.
Okay.
I'm never gonna grasp this, you're gonna
Okay.
keep saying it, I'm an image guy. I can
Okay.
see pictures.
Okay, well, I understand what
Right.
you'd like to see, I understand that, and I think,
And
really short of a rate model, I just think we can just pull those out and do a
Yeah.
slide or two.
I mean, it's
I
really
think so.
all
We know what they're
user
paying.
fees and all
That's right.
tap
How are they
fees
gonna escalate?
separately.
Sure. Okay,
Yeah, I just had one. Just my observation, looking at like scenario 2 and scenario 3, especially with the loan, I don't see a significant difference. So if we look out over the 10 years and the rates, as a resident, I'd be screaming at the same volume if my water bill, average bill is $71 or $76. So I'd really have to, if we look at the details, I'd really have to be sold on if that loan's really worth it.
it was actually disappointing to me when it said, well, what if we loan $6 million, to give the numbers back and say, that's it, just a percent difference,
Yeah.
it's,
Right.
but I thought it was good for illustrative purposes, again, these are just things I think to illustrate to the board, well, what if we tried this, what if we tried that, and like Ian said, I mean, we tried 50 scenarios, and we ran through a lot of things, and these are kind of the bookends, so,
Our largest input is gonna be NISP. And since we can't really change the timing of NISP,
right.
it's kind of, we need to produce this cash when we're asked to produce it. There's not a lot of wiggle room, and that's what that graph is kind of showing, where we tried to pull all these levers and we only got to 1%
It's
less.
expensive, there's only so much you can do.
Exactly.
I said buy a lottery ticket, nobody would.
I was gonna bring up the scenario 2 and 3 also, because I'm picturing people like, in town, $60 a year, to me is, okay, that's fine. But we might be bringing some, but I'm also thinking 10 years down the road, our community has grown. And we start borrowing from the general fund, we're gonna have additional needs in our community. Also, our infrastructure will be 10 years older. And so, as I looked at that, I was a little nervous about postponing any projects we might need down the road by loaning money out of our general funds. So I'm glad you brought that up. There's a little philosophical position here too. Overall, in Colorado, our water's pretty cheap. And we do want to encourage people to move toward more efficiency. And so, one way that other communities are talking about doing that is actually charging more realistically what water is really costing. You know, so that's another thing that philosophically we need to think about or encourage our population to. So I guess I'm leaning, get into it more towards a certain area too.
I wanted to point out, as I kind of mentioned a couple times in our presentation, that all these gray bars are basically the NIST projects. And in 2028, Big Orange is being paid by new development, so our actual capital costs in that year are about $2.5 million. And that gap, we're at about an equilibrium at the end here. And so the gap that we're showing here is basically that much that could be used for that 10-year-old infrastructure.
Yeah.
There's a lot more, as I mentioned, wiggle room and
Potential.
flexibility once we get past this large project that's coming in.
And even if NISP doesn't go, we're still gonna need to purchase more water, and that's included in your capital. And we're probably gonna have to expand.
Yeah, you're gonna be spending
We're
that money
gonna
for
spend
something.
money someplace.
That's right.
Right, so, yeah, we need to be realistic.
That's what I wanted to bring up earlier, was if we
Yeah.
had to go to our current water sources, assuming this doesn't go,
Right,
and we have to start getting more, what's the escalated cost to everybody because of that?
Yeah.
Yes, we're held hostage to what,
right,
all of what goes into making those rates, but,
yeah,
you know,
yes.
the infrastructure's already there
Right,
to,
and it may be cheaper than if we get a seat at the table, like we talked about with these other things. But if we went that route, it's gonna cost us money.
oh yeah,
So we're gonna,
still.
so the projections are still being realistic to our property.
Mhm.
So where do we go from here? What are our next steps in
Yeah.
our
Well-
water conversation? This is obviously still just the beginning.
Right, and so, ultimately, I think what we want to illustrate for the board is, and it's been said 3 or 4 times tonight, that with this coming online, we're gonna need a lot more cash on hand than we currently have. And there's 2 ways to get it. I think that the scenarios we presented tonight, again, looking at a lot more than what we presented, I think this is the way that we can have the least impact for the ratepayers, but there's no scenario we could run where there was no, impact to the ratepayers. And I'm sorry, I know what the board wanted. I think, most of staff live in town and are ratepayers, and so we have the same interest, that the board has in keeping it low.
Right.
But the scenario just doesn't exist. We did, build this again, growth in out years more conservatively, only 332 units a year, so if we hit a higher growth rate, then we're gonna have more cash on hand, and, I think this is something that, we're not asking the board to say, okay, these are gonna be our new rate impacts from here on through 2028. I think we're just saying that we need to start, looking at our water rates. I think we need to increase our water rates, and then I think we need to check back in to make sure that we're on target.
Well, I think to Ken's point, I think realistically, we have been providing probably at a low rate, probably well below what we probably should have done. We probably should have looked at this, earlier on and made some harder decisions. Because water's only gonna become more valuable. I mean, there's not all of a sudden gonna become more water available to us all. I mean, CVT doesn't have very many shares even left for the getting. So I think that combined with good education and conservation practices are the way that we have to move forward, so. And I think we would have this conversation irregardless of a project to be had. I don't think we can just stay status quo. And in 10 years, it's not like, look at probably everything else that's gonna go up around at the same time.
Yes. It will.
I mean, you have to be, it's just a natural evolution that water would too. So you don't need anything from us tonight,
Well,
otherwise this is information?
I think we are looking for some direction. One is, with this model, when did you build in, with your model, what does it assume for the rate increase on the water rates for your model, because that is important for the board to see that.
So that's gonna be the slide.
90% for two.
So this is gonna be rate increases on rate, all portions of a rate. So that's gonna be a usage charge and a fixed charge. In order to make that full 8 or 9.5% overall rate revenue increase.
Right, so that's one question for the board is this something that you wanna see a resolution, some point soon for rates in 2019? Cause that's kind of what's built into the model here. And I think if we do delay that, obviously it's gonna just change Ethan's model, and he's gonna say, well, now in 2020, we need to do something different. But I also understand that you may want more information before pulling that trigger, so it would be, if the board says, geez, get us this information before we make the decision, that's fine, or give us direction on, we wanna see a resolution increase by X. But this model does show, so basically it'd be 5%, right, Ian? We've already done the base rate increase for 2019.
3.29.
Yeah, we did 3.29, we didn't do the 4.5. But really the delta for NISP
So
was
it'd
at,
be the delta from whatever these rates, from scenario 2 or 3, whichever one would be chosen.
okay.
And when we looked at this within the last year, we were looking at more of the rate increases of scenario 2, because we were looking at 10%.
We were
10% per year is kind of what we,
Yeah.
I mean, that's already been floated out there for probably almost a year now, so.
Contingent on a record of decision.
Sure.
I think we have to bite the bullet, be honest with the public.
It's a tough decision.
Yeah.
I still wanna see that graph,
Yeah.
for to my mind, because that'll really
Yeah.
kind of smoke out who's bearing the burden.
But I would agree, we need a resolution sooner rather than later. And some good education information that we can relay to our citizens about the process and why we got there and what's all involved.
I think it
with
does,
water.
it involves a
That's,
community.
that all
outreach
has to go
campaign.
hand in hand.
Is March realistic though, to get that information out there and
Well,
get
we
him?
are planning
Get him
happy.
in
Get
first
this graph.
quarter, the actual hard copy of Windsor Matters to go out.
I'm sorry, when?
I think it's February.
Okay.
So that would be good timing. I mean, maybe we can coincide that, and that main feature can be about water.
I like that.
Because we're in the very early stages of planning the kind of that editorial content, so.
Okay, so we can certainly get out that slider, that information you asked for, I'll send it to the whole board. And then I'll see if that proposed a lot of conversation from the board, or if at any point, basically I just need a consensus. We wanna see a resolution, so obviously no vote will be taken until then, but, basically just staff to get working on a resolution. It does seem like, notwithstanding that, it seems like scenario 2 is kind of the preferred scenario, that building in a loan from the general fund doesn't seem to be that a preferred deal for that board. So, if I get that direction, we'll bring back a resolution that is kind of the difference between the rate increase that was adopted in December and the 9.5 that's recommended under scenario 2.
Okay.
That is what we're talking about. Because we did what, 4 or 5%?
Well, we did
3?
3.7.
3.7.
3.29.
For the first of the year.
3.29.
3.3.
3.3.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
It's a triple rating.
I do want to take a recess before we move into our executive session. Do we want to take the vote to move into executive session and have the recess then? Not the vote, the vote to go in and then we take the break?
I think that'd be good, because it'd give them
Okay.
a chance to stop the recording and everything else.
Okay,
Can I have 2 minutes to talk about Pinnacle and Housing Authority?
let's do it, let's move in, let's follow the agenda first and we can do
Okay,
that
do
then.
that later. Okay.
Why don't you go, or somebody want to read and make a motion for the executive session?
Do you have it there?
Yes,
Well, I can do it, I mean, I have it.
or whoever.
Madam Mayor, I move that we move into executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, subsection 4E and I, for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with respect to the Colorado National Sports Park.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor, is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second on the floor to move into executive session. All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So we'll take a 10-minute recess and then we'll be in come back to executive session.
Happy New Year. How was your holiday?